I don't know about you, but I want to have an auto team when I do my expeditions, and this dark one that just came out is kind of hard to do it with. What's going on, guys? This is Zarkaden, and today we're going to be talking about the new Destructive Gigantes expedition that's been added. This was put in place to replace the Blooming Snag glitch, and in general tends to be actually even a little bit harder. I know with all of us that had done the Blooming Snag, we had just finally started to speed tune around the crystal that was necessary, and they put in another weird mechanic for this dark one as well. So first, let's talk about what this boss does, and then we'll talk about a couple different ways that you can beat it. So when we're taking a look at this boss, there's going to be a couple things that are most important. I would say two. Number one, the S3 on the boss. The S3 is up immediately when you start the fight. So that's a good thing to note is the boss sits around a 200-ish speed. So any of my players that were under 200 were going after he S3'd, and any of mine that were above obviously went before he S3'd. Well, here's the problem ultimately with this and why this boss is very, very difficult to auto. When the boss does the S3, it actually will dispel all of the debuffs you've put onto the boss currently. It dispels them off of itself and off of its ad before it applies Electrocute to all four of your characters. Electrocute is a new debuff, and the way that it works is anytime any of your characters are actually using a non-combat skill, it will dispel it off of them, and anytime that they use a normal combat ability, it will actually just electrocute all four of them, even if it was only one character that was attacking. So you want to get rid of these electrocutes as fast as possible. The less electrocutes that currently exist on your team, the less damage that your healer has to heal through, the better it goes. So as many characters as you can that can have non-combat skills somewhere in their rotation, and hopefully earlier in their rotation than later, the better. I did find that moling things was actually semi-important for this because obviously turn reductions on a lot of things, especially with non-combats, are very important because you want this to be up a lot. Every single time the boss S3s, you're going to have to deal with that mechanic, and it definitely starts to add up over time. So keep that in mind for the S3. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is the Inceptio cannon. So the way the Inceptio cannon works is he has this little ad that joins him that is constantly invincible. As an invincible mob, you can't do any damage to it, which is a positive and a negative. You have the ability to CR manipulate it, which is good still, because there's no immunity. But since you can't damage it, you can also sleep it or stun it. The sleep is really amazing because normally with sleep, when you attack it, it actually kind of comes out of sleep and you just get the crit off of it. Well, when you can't take damage, the sleep just exists until that mob has made it all the way 100% through its CR bar. So any character that can sleep or stun is incredibly useful for helping to deal with this ad, and here's why. Number one, when the boss uses its S2, it can actually trigger a dual attack, meaning the ad will actually get a chance to attack with. And then when you start looking at what the ad actually does when it attacks, it will actually increase skill cooldown on every single player on your team when you get attacked. So even if it resists, like you would think, oh well, maybe I'll resist. That's just too inconsistent when it comes to autoing. So you really want to do what you can to not have this Inceptio cannon attack pretty much at all. So knowing that, we actually have basically gotten to the point of, well, there's so many different ways you can actually beat this boss. There's going to be full auto comps, there's going to be partial auto comps, and then there's going to be comps that literally don't auto at all and are going to just give you a lot more points because you're going to have a lot more control of the little Inceptio cannon. Ideally, I would like to get to the point, like I do with all the other expeditions, to being full auto. But for the sake of not everybody having all the right characters or just kind of like giving some ideas, we're going to talk through a couple of different things here. Thank you and big shout outs to SirVown as well as Grimstad for basically handing over their ideas of what they use. And then also I'll show you guys mine and even make a couple of extra honorable mentions at the end of other characters that might also be good. So this first composition we're going to look at is going to be SirVown's composition. So you'll notice he has Falconer Clury, he has Tamarin, he has Sedom, and he has Arbiter Vildred. All he's doing in this run is turning off the Falconer Clury's S3 before the boss does its first S3, and then afterwards literally turns it back on and autos from there. So doesn't even have to uncheck auto, can literally just like quick click on Flurry, she does her ability, click it back on, boss does S3, you're good to go. You may also notice that he actually doesn't have an artifact on both the Flurry and the Tamarin. So having two of the, I would say, more important characters to have artifacts on, not having them and still being able to pull out 300,000 should let you know that this composition is pretty strong and absolutely worth the try if you have the correct characters to do it. Next up, we're going to be talking about Grim's version of this fight, and he ends up using Iseria as well as Vivian, Tam, and Lilius. So at the beginning, he actually does manual. It does not go into auto. He'll use the S3 on the Lilius just to make sure that the S2 is up next, which would have happened on auto, but we're most worried and most consistently wanting to see that Iseria go next. You want to use the S2, even though it's going to happen before the boss uses his S3, you want to make sure you use that on Tamarin because it gets rid of an 8-turn cooldown at the beginning, and that's pretty huge for this particular fight. So making sure that happens is giant. Afterwards, he just S1s the boss with Iseria for the second turn, and then the boss goes and he autos. This team ended up getting a pretty consistent over 500,000, which I would call amazing. Like, that's definitely what you're looking for. Unfortunately, it's not fully auto, so it doesn't quite hit all of the things that we want to see, but as far as consistency goes, it definitely has a much more consistent 500,000 spot rather than manualing it. So we'll take it if that's all it takes. Finally, the team that I chose ended up being Lilius, Silverblade Araminta, Lulica, and Tamarin. Now, obviously there's lots of ways to do this, but I really wanted to go with a way that I can feel pretty confident about being able to walk away with and getting a good amount of score. None of these characters are geared in anything more than just typical PvE gear, which I realize for ML era you would think, why would you do that? But I just didn't have a lot of extra gear, and I will post the end of the video. I'll show you guys the stats for this. Basically, what I wanted to do here was make sure that my other characters, other than Lilius, were actually under 200. I think you could actually be over 200 on the Lulica, and that would be fine because, again, Lulica's S2 is the one that gets rid of the electrocute, so it makes more sense to kind of have her over 200, but I didn't initially have my Lilius over 200, so I ended up moving my Lilius up to 200. I ended up actually moving my Araminta down to 192, and basically that was intentional, so that way I'd be able to, for sure, be able to immediately hit them with a stun from the S3 on the Silverblade Araminta right after he used the S3. So that doesn't guarantee me stuns the entire time, but it does guarantee me the initial stun 80% of the time, 90% of the time, a lot of times. It gets it a lot. The other thing that you'll notice here with this team is that I have a crown on that Silverblade Araminta, and as much as I would love to go with a crown as well on the Lulu, I actually am keeping Lulu the same for the sake of my Wyvern team, which is still DDJ, which I realize gets no extra benefit. So keeping in mind that Lulu is getting 0 extra benefit here, this team actually works out really, really well. So you've got Lilius to be able to get rid of stuff with her S2. She has the potential to dual attack, which is super, super nice, especially if you get little extra defense breaks from Lulica or extra potential stuns from the Silverblade. But then you've got Lulica there, similar ideas. S2 also gets rid of with the non-combat is good there, as well as a bunch of defense breaks with the EE to give her extra turns on that S1. Super, super good. Tamarin, the S3 gets rid of Electrocute. The S2 gets rid of Electrocute. Not to mention the fact that she just generally does really good heals, so Tamarin's still a very solid choice here. And then the only other person that I ended up taking was the SBA, and the SBA ended up being super helpful here because as long as you time it right so that the S3 hits after the S3, the speed ends up making it in a good spot where you will very consistently be able to land that. Once you've landed one, from there, all you have to do is start landing all of your burns. Because with a crown on, if you're burned or if the boss is burned, you will naturally do an S2 as well, meaning you will also hit the extra add, not just the boss. That's huge because you can potentially burn, which doesn't really do anything to the add, but those burns have a chance to also proc the crown proc. So being that you have S3 for stun as well as these S2s that are just going to be going off all the time, you keep the ad relatively CC'd, and thus this composition seems to work pretty well. I've run it a few times, and I've been able to see that like I'm consistently staying around that like 400,000 plus mark. I would say that's more than enough. Again, 250 or higher and you're solid, and I feel like we can at least get 250 with this as long as not everything completely goes wrong. So This comp, I think, is actually a pretty good full auto comp and something that you might actually enjoy if you've got Silverblade Araminta. Since I'm sure you're probably going to be curious what my Silverblade Araminta stats were, here they are. Obviously not super healthy or defensive, and honestly her attack is not super high, as well as crit chance is low and low crit hit damage. The biggest thing we wanted was effectiveness. We wanted her to be just under 200 speed. Obviously her gear could be 1,000 times better if you were using her for other content, but since at the moment she's not usually something I'm going to be picking in RTA, this was totally fine for me. The stats for the Lilius are right here. I did actually make her a little bit bulkier than normal, but more than anything I just wanted her to be over 200. She was just a little bit shy of that, so we ended up bringing her up to 207, just so that she would be able to go before the boss like we had talked about. Tamarin is on her normal gear, the stuff that I usually use her on for PvE. Again, 207. Doesn't necessarily matter if she goes first or like before the boss or after, because if nobody needs a heal yet and she goes first, which in my case she does, she's just going to attack the boss, so nothing really gets wasted there, so she's totally fine. And then finally Lulika, who again is on DDJ, complete waste of an artifact for this piece of content, but good for other content that I use her for, so we're just going to leave it as is. And she's obviously slower than 200 speed, but ideally you would actually have her higher than 200 speed so that she would use her S3 before the boss goes, and then you can actually S2 right off the bat. So that's pretty much it, guys. So many different combinations you can use for this particular boss. I've seen stuff where people are using Arby's. I've seen people that are using Ravi's. I mean, there's so many things out there that aren't even in the attempts that we showed you that also work fine. Also, I'm very aware, because I'm sure somebody's going to say this, that SBA is a light unit, and why would you bring a light unit into something where if she gets hit by the boss, she's going to get crushed? Well, most of the time, being that she's not up front, she's not going to get hit all that often, and so I didn't really worry too much about it. Every once in a while, she will take a little bit too much damage, but whatever. So we lose one every once in a while. Not a huge deal. Again, this boss is not the most consistent auto, but finding that I'm autoing it pretty darn consistently is good enough for me. If you guys have any other amazing ideas or great compositions that you guys are using that are just like, oh my gosh, dude, you don't even know about this one, but this one is like the thing, please drop it in the comments below. Would love to hear it. Guys, make sure if you enjoy this content to like, comment, subscribe, say all the things. We appreciate hearing from you, and we will see you in the next video. Peace out, guys.